Sunday morning. The pews of Greater Promise Baptist Church were packed, the choir robes pressed, the organ humming softly in anticipation. Sunlight beamed through stained-glass windows, casting warm reds and golds on the congregation. The sanctuary buzzed with joy, another baptism, another soul saved. Pastor Elijah Moore stood waist-deep in the baptismal tank, his hands gently guiding a teenage boy into position. "Buried in sin, raised in salvation," he declared. The crowd echoed with amens. But as he lowered the boy into the water, something changed. A sharp shriek cut through the silence. Sister Diane Turner, seated in the second row, clutched her chest and pointed toward the tank. "There's something in there," she cried. Murmurs turned into gasps as the water swirled red. The boy stumbled out, coughing. A deacon rushed forward and reached in. What he pulled out wasn't just debris. It was a piece of bone. White, smooth, unmistakably human. Panic erupted. Children cried. One woman fainted. Police were called. Within the hour, crime scene tape covered the altar. The baptismal pool, once sacred, was drained by forensic techs, revealing a grinning, decayed human skull wedged beneath the submerged steps. That day, salvation was put on hold. Instead of rejoicing, Hollow Creek whispered a question no one ever thought they'd ask. Who was buried beneath their church? And more urgently, how did they end up beneath Pastor Elijah Moore? As police cordoned off the building, Elijah stood off to the side, stone-faced. He didn't pray. He didn't plead. He simply stared at the skull, his jaw tight, his hands steady. Not a single tear fell. Behind him, townspeople murmured. Some still clung to their Bibles. Others clutched their children tighter. But one thing was clear. Something unholy had crept into their sacred space. And the man they all trusted to lead them in faith? He now stood at the center of a crime scene. People remembered strange smells near the tank over the summer. A maintenance man once mentioned a rust-colored streak seeping from the seams. But no one questioned it. Not in this church. Not with Elijah Moore at the pulpit. Now nothing was safe. And beneath the horror, something else stirred. A deep, rising need to know what Elijah was hiding. Because if a skeleton was under the baptismal tank, what else had been buried beneath his holy image? If you're finding this story meaningful, we'd be grateful if you subscribed. Thank you. Before he was the man with 3 wives and a skull in his sanctuary, Pastor Elijah Moore was the man in Hollow Creek. He was tall, handsome, with a voice like velvet dipped in honey. People said his sermons could stir even the coldest heart. They said he was called chosen, a man of God with the patience of Job and the smile of a saint. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, Elijah was the youngest of 5 kids and the only one to finish college. He graduated from a small Christian seminary, then bounced between storefront ministries until landing in Hollow Creek, Georgia, a town of 3,000 people and just as many secrets. When he arrived, Greater Promise Baptist was falling apart. The roof leaked. Attendance was dismal. The former pastor had left under quiet scandal. But Elijah changed everything. Within a year, pews were full. Within 2, the church was remodeled. He started food drives, sponsored scholarships, even got a stoplight installed near the school. People didn't just like Elijah, they trusted him, needed him. He moved through town like a shepherd. The elderly waved from porches. Young men straightened up when he passed. Women lingered after Sunday service just to hear him speak. And Elijah? He smiled humbly, always deflecting praise. But behind the kindness, something stayed sealed off. Even his closest deacons said he was hard to read. Never showed temper. Never shared too much about his past. He lived alone, claimed he was waiting on God to send the right woman. A few raised eyebrows when he bought a house too big for a single man, but no one pressed him. Not in a town like Hollow Creek. Not with a preacher like him. Still, small oddities existed if you knew where to look. He never stayed long at church functions. Never invited anyone inside his home. Kept his office locked, even from staff. One night, a janitor found him sitting in the sanctuary long after midnight, whispering what sounded like an argument, but he was alone. None of it was enough to suspect this. That Sunday when the skull emerged, everything began to unravel. Police launched an investigation, citing probable foul play. The coroner confirmed the remains were human and had been submerged for years, not months. Elijah told them nothing. Not denial. Not defense. Just silence. And in that silence, stories began to surface. One woman said she once saw Elijah in Atlanta, arm in arm with someone she thought was his wife. But hadn't he said he was single? Another claimed he used to travel once a month, supposedly for preaching conferences. But now those trips looked different. Sinister. People began to whisper the unthinkable. What if Elijah Moore wasn't just a liar, but a murderer? Hollow Creek, Georgia, blink and you'd miss it. A two-stoplight town nestled between farmland and forest, where kids rode bikes till dark and mamas yelled from porches instead of texting. The kind of place where the Dollar General served as both grocery store and town hall. Where secrets didn't stay buried for long, unless someone made sure they did. The community was mostly black, working class, proud. Generations of families had lived there. They gathered for fish fries on Friday nights and packed the high school bleachers on game days. There was struggle, yes, low wages, aging homes, dreams deferred. But also strength, laughter, survival. Greater Promise Baptist sat right in the heart of it all, both literally and spiritually. The steeple towered above everything else, white with a gold cross, visible from almost every corner of town. Church was the backbone. Baptisms, weddings, funerals, every major moment passed through its doors. And at the center was Pastor Elijah Moore. He walked those streets like he belonged to everyone. He prayed over new businesses, showed up at every vigil. Folks said he made them feel seen, gave them hope. That was rare in a place like Hollow Creek, where hope often came last in line. But after that Sunday, things changed. News vans parked outside the church. Strangers in suits knocked on doors, asking questions no one wanted to answer. Rumors spread faster than wildfire, each version more chilling than the last. They said the bones belonged to a girl. They said she had been a member of the choir. They said Elijah used the tank not for baptism, but for burial. Every theory had a face, a voice behind it. I always knew something wasn't right. He looked too good to be true. Remember when the Daniels girl disappeared? Fear coated every conversation like Georgia humidity, heavy and inescapable. Still, some defended him. Deacon Wallace, an elder in the church, stood on the church steps and shouted at reporters. He's a good man. The devil's trying to break us. Others nodded, cried, clung to scripture. But doubt had crept in. It showed in the nervous way folks looked at each other, in the sudden drop in tithes, in the silence that filled the sanctuary the following Sunday. The town had always relied on its sense of knowing. Who married who? Who cheated? Who drank too much? But this? A pastor with a skull in his baptismal tank? This rewrote the rules. No one could agree on what they knew anymore. Only that something was terribly wrong, and that whatever secrets Elijah Moore carried, they were far from done surfacing. Felicia Moore hadn't always been suspicious. In fact, for most of her marriage, she believed she was the lucky one. She met Elijah 16 years earlier at a revival in Montgomery. He was guest preaching, magnetic on stage, gentle off it. He offered to pray for her sick mother, then called the next day to check in. By the third call, Felicia was smiling in her sleep. By the second month, they were engaged. They married in a quiet ceremony in Mississippi. No family, no guests, just us and God, Elijah said. Felicia, a school counselor with a warm heart and a quiet strength, thought it was romantic. She left her job, moved to Hollow Creek, and supported Elijah as he built Greater Promise. But over the years, cracks formed. Elijah traveled often, usually claiming conferences or emergency pastoral visits in Atlanta or Birmingham. He rarely answered his phone when away. His explanations were calm, plausible, laced with scripture. Felicia, faithful to a fault, never pushed too hard. Until one Tuesday night. She was cleaning out the closet, looking for an old sweater, when she found a taped-up shoebox behind a row of coats. Inside, she found a second cell phone. Powered off. Curious, she plugged it in. The messages she read froze her breath. Can't wait to see you again, baby. Last night was heaven. You're my husband in every way. You left your watch at my place again, preacher man. Photos followed. A woman smiling in bed. A mirror selfie with Elijah standing behind her, shirtless. The timestamps matched weekends Elijah said he'd been praying with a grieving family in Macon. Felicia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She placed the phone back in the box, taped it shut, and sat down at the kitchen table. Hands clasped, staring at nothing. The next morning she followed him. He drove to a modest brick house 20 minutes outside of town. Parked. Knocked. A woman answered. Elijah kissed her. Not hugged. Kissed. Felicia waited until he left. Then she knocked. The woman's name was Tasha Bryant. And according to her, she was married to Elijah too. Had been for 6 years. You must be one of his cousins, she said, smiling. Felicia's knees buckled. She left without explaining. Without confronting Elijah. Instead, She went home and began looking for documents, anything to prove she hadn't lost her mind. What she found was worse: duplicate marriage licenses. Filed under different counties, different years, but the same man. Same signature. And that wasn't the end. There was a third address. Another city. Another woman. Elijah Moore wasn't just an adulterer. He was a bigamist. And the bones in the baptismal tank, they might just be the fourth wife no one knew about. Tasha Bryant believed in love the way some people believe in miracles. Quietly, desperately, and always with hope. She met Elijah Moore at a hotel Bible study in downtown Atlanta. He was in town for a leadership summit, speaking to a group of young professionals. She was 32, working 2 jobs, raising her son alone, and praying for stability. Elijah stood out immediately. Polished, charming, sincere. He remembered her name, complimented her parenting, even quoted scripture in a way that didn't feel forced. When he told her God had a plan for her life, she felt seen. She hadn't felt that in years. 3 months later, they were married. It wasn't a big wedding, just a courthouse ceremony and a dinner afterward. He said he wanted to keep things intimate and prayerful. She agreed. She didn't need anything fancy. What she needed was someone who stayed. Someone who kept his promises. They lived in her small apartment during the week. On weekends, Elijah claimed he returned to his home church in Hollow Creek. He said they were in a transition period, and he didn't want to uproot things too fast. He promised they'd eventually settle together in Atlanta. He was affectionate, attentive, sometimes tired, always busy but loving. Still, little things didn't add up. He never brought her to Hollow Creek, never introduced her to church members, never allowed her to post about him on social media. He claimed he was private, that ministry came with spiritual battles, and he needed to protect their peace. She believed him, until Felicia knocked on her door. Tasha opened it to find a woman standing there with red eyes, a trembling voice, and a question. "How long have you been married to Elijah Moore?" Tasha laughed, nervous, confused. "Since 2019. Why?" Felicia didn't answer. She just pulled out a marriage certificate. Her own. Dated 2012. Same groom. The shock was immediate. Her hands went cold. Her legs unsteady. She sat on the couch without realizing it. It wasn't just betrayal. It was disorientation. How do you process the fact that your husband isn't yours? They sat together, 2 women who should have been strangers, now bound by lies. Tasha pulled out her marriage license. They matched. Elijah hadn't even changed his handwriting. Just the counties. Then Felicia dropped the other shoe. "There's another address," she said. "In Birmingham. A woman named Sherelle." Tasha blinked. "Who's Sherelle?" "His third wife." That night, Tasha looked at her son and broke down. She thought about every prayer she had prayed, every night she spent alone thinking her husband was serving God. Now she had to wonder, what exactly had he been doing during those long absences? And more importantly, what else had he been hiding? Sherelle Jones thought she was Elijah Moore's first wife. They met in Birmingham, Alabama, during a charity outreach hosted by her church. Sherelle, a nurse practitioner with a fierce sense of independence, wasn't easily impressed. But Elijah wore his confidence like a tailored suit, soft-spoken, spiritually grounded, and unusually attentive. He said he was starting a new ministry. Said he wanted a partner, not just a wife. Someone to walk beside him, not behind. That's what got her. The way he made it sound like they'd build something together. They married in 2008. Quietly. Elijah told her he didn't want distractions from the calling on their lives. The work comes first, he always said. For the first year, he was present. Loving. They even led small couples workshops at a local community center. But after a while, he started disappearing for weekend revivals in Georgia. Then Alabama. Then North Carolina. He always had a reason. Always had a verse to cover the gaps. Sherelle never doubted him. But she always felt a distance, something she could never name. And she noticed things. Long strands of hair on his jacket, not hers. Duplicate receipts in different cities. Bank transfers to accounts she didn't recognize. She once found a lipstick-stained coffee cup in the back seat of his car. She confronted him. He deflected. "Temptation follows any man of God," he'd say. "But I have eyes for you alone." Sherelle prayed harder. Worked longer shifts. Let the doubts rest. Until a knock came to her door. This time it was 2 women. Tasha and Felicia stood side by side. They didn't yell. They didn't accuse. They just looked tired, exhausted really. And they held documents. Marriage licenses. Photos. Even a sermon flyer with Elijah's name on it. Dated the same weekend, he told Sherelle he was on a spiritual retreat in the mountains. At first, Sherelle thought it was a scam, or some twisted prank. Then she saw a photo of Elijah in bed with Tasha. Her heart stopped, not because of the betrayal, but because the room in the background looked familiar. It was the same hotel Elijah took her to on their anniversary 3 years ago. He'd reused the room, the pose, even the smile. They compared timelines, marriage dates, phone records. Everything overlapped. He hadn't just lied, he'd built entire lives. Separate homes, separate bank accounts, separate wives. Sherelle sat down, clutching the armrest. She felt rage, shame, confusion, but mostly a hollowing inside her chest. She remembered something strange, too. A woman had once come to the clinic where she worked, black eye, sprained wrist, saying she needed to get away from the preacher. Sherelle had assumed she meant spiritually. But now, she wasn't so sure. The woman had given her a name, Nia. At the time, it hadn't meant anything. But now it might mean everything. The name echoed like a warning bell through Sherelle's mind, Nia. She hadn't thought about that night in years. The woman had come in just before closing, eyes bloodshot, arm cradled, voice shaky. Said her name was Nia Fields. She didn't give much detail, just asked for painkillers and a ride to the bus station. Said she was leaving town and never coming back. Sherelle had tried to help. Offered to call someone, maybe a shelter. But Nia refused. She kept saying one thing, over and over. Don't trust the pastor. At the time, Sherelle assumed she meant a boyfriend with some spiritual delusion. The phrase didn't stick until now. Felicia and Tasha both went still when she said the name. Tasha pulled out her phone and opened an old group photo from a 2015 church retreat Elijah had hosted in Atlanta. There, third from the left, was a young woman, petite, caramel-skinned, with long braids and tired eyes. That's her, Sherelle whispered. That's the girl from the clinic. They stared at the image. Nia Fields, a name that had been forgotten but not gone. Within hours, the three women were digging online records, old church rosters, social media posts. They discovered that Nia had once been a choir member at Greater Promise Baptist. She volunteered with youth groups. Was last seen in Hollow Creek nearly 10 years ago. After that, nothing. No new photos. No graduation. No obituary. Just silence. Felicia, now working with a private investigator, unofficially, quietly, tracked down a former deacon who remembered Nia. Said she was always close to Elijah. Too close, he added. But no one dared question it back then. Elijah was untouchable. The PI pulled Nia's file. It was thin. She'd never been reported missing. No known next of kin. Only a few scattered documents, a community college enrollment form, a driver's license from Alabama, and one police report filed 7 months before she vanished. The report claimed harassment. From an E. Moore. It had been dismissed. No follow-up. No charges. Just a signature and a date. 7 months later, she was gone. The investigator cross-referenced her last known address. It was 1 street over from the church. They pulled the permit records for the church's recent renovations, the ones Elijah oversaw himself. The baptismal tank had been deepened in 2017. No contractor on file. Just a note that said, in-house adjustment by staff. Staff, meaning Elijah. And beneath that tank, just weeks ago they had pulled up a skull. The same age, the same gender, the same timeline. Sherelle, Tasha, and Felicia sat together in stunned silence. If that body was Nia, they hadn't just married a liar. They had slept beside a killer. The burner phone wasn't Elijah's only secret. Felicia knew if he'd lied about marriages, about entire people, then his life had more layers than even she was ready to see. She returned to the house they once shared in Hollow Creek, not the polished front Elijah had shown the church, but the back rooms. The locked drawers. The storage boxes no one had touched in years. She started with his office. The first drawer stuck. She yanked harder until it came loose, nearly toppling over. Inside were folders, ordinary enough, until she opened them. Each one labeled by year, and inside, receipts, wire transfers, birth certificates. Some of them were forged. One birth certificate listed a daughter, Elijah's daughter. But Felicia never had children. Neither did Tasha. Neither did Sherelle. The name read, Nia Jordan Fields Moore. Filed in 2013. She dropped the paper. This wasn't just some affair. This was lineage. Possession. Elijah had claimed her. Another document showed a deed to a small cabin just outside Montgomery. Paid in full. No mortgage. No paper trail linking it to his real name, just a trust fund under Faith Works Ministries LLC. Felicia didn't recognize the name, but the investigator did. It had been used before in a lawsuit. A quiet settlement. The plaintiff's name sealed. The allegation? Exploitation under spiritual duress. Again, no charges. No arrest. Just money. $67,000. Paid in full. Tasha checked the bank transfers tied to Elijah's church fund. There were gaps. Withdrawals listed as community outreach that didn't match up to any recorded events. He was laundering through the church. Not just money, but movement. Travel. Real estate. Names. Sherelle uncovered altered tax records. One year, Elijah filed as single. The next, as married, with a different name each time. Sometimes Felicia. Sometimes Tasha. Sometimes none of them. One name repeated on multiple forms. N. Fields. It was starting to feel like Nia was never allowed to leave. Maybe she tried. Maybe that's why she ran to Sherelle's clinic. Maybe that's why she vanished. Maybe she didn't just vanish. The three women presented their findings to a sympathetic county detective who'd been quietly working the skull case. He said nothing at first. Just flipped through the forged documents, the faked ID copies, the church financial ledgers. Then he looked up and said, "This isn't just bigamy. This is fraud. Predatory control. Possibly homicide." But then came the twist that stopped them cold. A week before the baptismal bones surfaced, a local fisherman called in a tip. Said he'd found a suitcase floating near the edge of the Okmulgee River. Inside was a set of clothes, a Bible, and a driver's license. The name? Nia Fields. The suitcase had been tagged and stored as evidence. But the DNA hadn't been processed. Not yet. Felicia asked the detective, "What if it's not her in the tank?" He hesitated. What if that skeleton is someone else? By now, the skeleton in the baptismal tank felt less like a discovery and more like a challenge. Who else didn't you know Elijah Moore? Investigators dug deeper into the documents the women had unearthed. Every folder was a puzzle piece, and each one exposed something darker. This wasn't just a man leading a double life. It was a maze of manipulation, built over decades, crafted to look holy. The forged marriage licenses were just the start. There were property deeds in multiple states, each purchased under slightly different LLC names, each tied to church-sounding entities like Harvest and Light Trust, Faith Works Ministries, and Covenant Nation Holdings. All roads led back to Elijah, but none ever directly named him. The tax filings were clever. Elijah never appeared wealthy. He drove a modest sedan, wore clean but simple suits. Always gave just enough to appear selfless. But under the surface, money moved, quietly, efficiently. Transfers of $3,000 here, $8,000 there. Spread out across accounts, cleverly labeled as youth ministry travel or grief counseling. But grief wasn't what they were funding. They found a wire transfer of $15,000 to a woman in North Carolina, labeled as a housing relocation grant. She refused to speak with law enforcement. Said she'd already signed something. The PI suspected a non-disclosure agreement. Meanwhile, a forensic team dug into old church renovations. The expansion Elijah had spearheaded included the tank, a new basement addition, and, strangely, a below-ground concrete enclosure no one seemed to know existed. It had been sealed up just 2 years ago. When they broke it open, they didn't find another body. They found evidence. Boxes of women's clothing. Polaroids. Letters, torn and water-damaged, addressed to E. One read, "You said you'd never leave me. I told you I was pregnant. Why won't you answer?" Another read, "I saw you with her. You said I was your only wife." The handwriting didn't match any of the 3 women still alive. And then came the master file. A black binder labeled simply, Sanctuary. Inside there were profiles. Photos of women. Notes in the margins. Age. City. Status. Spiritual readiness, high. Emotional independence, low. Under some photos, he'd written verses. Usually proverbs. Sometimes revelation. Always circled. Always weaponized. This wasn't love. This was selection. Targeting. Grooming. And then there was the most chilling entry. A name written in red ink. Nia Fields, rebellious spirit. Must contain. 3 words underlined beneath it. Already threatened exposure. At this point, even the most stoic investigators sat back. This wasn't just a charismatic man with charm. This was someone who had built a system around control, psychological, spiritual, and maybe fatal. And the worst part, the skeleton in the tank wasn't Nia. The dental records just came back. The victim was a 24-year-old woman named Joylene Marks. A woman no one had even known was missing. Once her name was known, the story of Joylene Marks rippled through Hollow Creek like a shockwave. She wasn't from there. In fact, most of the town had never heard her name. But those who had, mostly women who once passed through Greater Promise Baptist, remembered her vaguely. Quiet girl. Sweet. Never stayed long. One said Joylene used to sing backup in the choir. Another said she helped with the children's ministry during summer programs. Always smiling, always early, always standing near Elijah Moore. But no one could say when she left. Because no one noticed when she disappeared. She wasn't local. She had moved from South Carolina, transferred to the community college in Hollow Creek. No parents nearby. No siblings. Just a scholarship and a part-time job at the diner. She vanished in 2018. Back then, people were too distracted by the church expansion, the revivals, the talk of Elijah being offered a spot on a national ministry network. Joylene simply faded away. Until now, when her bones resurfaced under the pastor's sacred tank. The autopsy was clear. Strangulation. No defensive wounds. No signs of a struggle. She didn't fight. She trusted. Her remains were clean, dry, stored long before the tank ever filled with water. Someone, likely Elijah, had removed the panel under the platform during the renovations and placed her there. A burial hidden inside a blessing. Hollow Creek reeled. Not just because of the crime, but because of what it meant. People remembered Elijah's 2018 sermon series, Bury What Haunts You. A fiery 3-week stretch where he talked about releasing the past, cleansing yourself, dying to old ways. It had become one of his most quoted teachings. Now it sounded different. More like a confession. The town shifted. The very air felt heavier. Parents clutched daughters closer. Deacons quit the board. Tithes dropped by 70%. The once busy sanctuary echoed with silence. Even those who still believed in Elijah struggled. He was a good man, said Sister Bernice, a churchgoer for 20 years. If he did wrong, it had to be the devil. But doubt bloomed in every corner. People recalled little things. A door that was always locked, a back office no one but Elijah entered, whispered conversations near the baptistry when no one else was around. And then there were the notes. Anonymous letters slid under the church door. Left on windshields. Handwritten, trembling script. I saw her crying after service. He told her not to leave town. She said she was scared to go home. Each note pointed to one thing. Joylene wasn't just a name in the system. She had tried to get out. She'd even told someone. But no one listened. And the town? It did what small towns do best. It looked the other way, until her skull stared back up from the water. The name Nia Field still hung heavy in the air, but now it wasn't just her name they whispered in Hollow Creek. It was her face, her final warning, and a question no one could answer. Where was she now? When Joylene's identity was confirmed, investigators circled back to the suitcase found near the Okmulgee River. DNA on the Bible matched Nia. Her fingerprints were on the driver's license. A partial thumbprint on the suitcase handle matched Elijah Moore. But there was no body, just remnants. A set of burned prayer journals. Torn letters signed, "Your wife always." Her name had never been legally changed, but the tone was personal. Intimate. Troubled. The suitcase told a story of someone preparing to flee, but not making it. Sherelle, who had treated Nia once in her clinic, recalled bruises in strange places, upper arms, lower back. Signs of restraint, maybe. But Nia never said. She just wanted to leave. Sherelle gave her a ride to the Greyhound station. That was the last time anyone saw her. Now, with Joylene confirmed dead and the trail turning cold, the case hit a wall, until Felicia found the voicemail. It had been left on her old home phone, weeks before the baptismal horror. She hadn't checked that line in months. The voice was muffled, rushed, but unmistakably hers. "Felicia, it's Nia. I don't know if you even know me, but I know who you are. I know what he did to you, what he's still doing. I tried to leave, and he found me. Please, don't believe anything he says. Don't let him baptize anyone else. There's." Static swallowed the last line. The voicemail cut off at 43 seconds. The timestamp? Just 3 days before the police found the skull. It was the first real confirmation. Nia was alive after Joylene, which meant Elijah might have been covering one death, while still controlling another woman. A request was made for subpoenaed cell tower pings from Elijah's burner phones. The data took time to process, but when it came in, it showed something chilling. Elijah had been near the Okmulgee River twice that month. Once, 2 days before the suitcase was discovered. And once, the night after it was reported to police. Was he trying to retrieve something? Or make sure something stayed gone? And then came the final piece, Nia's bank account. Inactive for years. But 3 days ago, someone tried to access it. From a computer inside Greater Promise Baptist Church. There were only 2 people with keys to the church's office. One was Deacon Wallace. The other was Elijah Moore. But Elijah was already in custody. So who was trying to access Nia's account now? Was it her? Or someone making sure she stayed erased? They found the tape in a box marked Youth Sermons 2014. Dusty, unlabeled, and nearly discarded during a sweep of the church's media room. A volunteer was cataloging old recordings when he noticed something strange. One tape had been tampered with. Rewound so tightly it warped the film. He turned it into police. Investigators almost overlooked it, until a tech queued it up. The sermon began like any other. Elijah stood at the pulpit, vibrant, warm, preaching to a packed sanctuary. He wore his signature dove-gray suit, his hands open, his voice gentle. He was speaking about repentance. The weight of sin, he said, isn't always on your shoulders. Sometimes it hides under your feet, buried, but still breathing. Then, 26 minutes in, the tone shifted. The camera was still rolling. He'd paused, stepped away from the pulpit, and walked toward the baptistry. The congregation laughed nervously. He turned back and looked directly into the lens. You ever do something so bad, he said, voice suddenly low, you bury it beneath the water, and hope God won't look there? Silence. It wasn't in his notes. Wasn't part of the message. Even the organist stopped playing. Then he muttered it, barely audible. But water don't wash bones. A long pause. Then he smiled, wiped his face with a cloth, and continued preaching as if nothing had happened. The detectives rewound it 4 times. That wasn't a metaphor. It was a warning. Felicia watched the clip and nearly collapsed. Sherelle paced. Tasha cried, quietly, as if finally hearing something they had all sensed but couldn't prove. This wasn't just spiritual manipulation. It was psychological theater. A man using his pulpit to confess in plain sight, wrapped in scripture, veiled in metaphors so few dared to challenge. The sermon, once uploaded to evidence servers, was flagged by multiple viewers online. But one message stood out, an anonymous tip. It simply read, he recorded everything. Check the crawlspace. The church's crawlspace hadn't been inspected during the initial sweep. It was low, narrow, dark, barely used. Most assumed it was storage. But when investigators entered it with flashlights, they found something more disturbing than a body. Dozens of mini cassette tapes, labeled by hand. Nia, confession number 3. Joylene, counseling number 1. April, final talk. Maya, discipline. Felicia, prayer record. Sherelle, obedience. And more. Dozens more. Some tapes were blank. Others were damaged. But several, when played, were clear. They heard women crying, pleading, some praying, some begging. One voice, Nia's, was unmistakable. I tried to leave. I wanted to believe in God, but you're not him. You're not anything holy. You're a cage. And Elijah's response, calm and chilling. I'm the only way out. If you leave, no one will believe you. But if you stay, I can make you clean. The baptistry, the bones, the sermons. It was never about faith. It was about control. The courtroom was standing room only. Camera crews lined the sidewalk. News anchors whispered rehearsed intros into handheld mics. Inside, the people of Hollow Creek sat with bated breath, some clutching crosses, others clutching tissues, all waiting to see the man they once called shepherd take the stand as the accused. Elijah Moore entered in shackles, head high, suit pressed. Still looking like a pastor. Still wearing that signature calm that had once comforted hundreds. He didn't look broken. He looked prepared. The charges were sprawling: bigamy, fraud, unlawful burial, coercion, aggravated sexual battery, and the murder of Joylene Marks. A second-degree homicide charge was pending review, still tied to the question of Nia Fields, whose body had never been found. His defense team argued character. They brought up his community service, his charitable donations, his pastoral legacy. They called him a deeply spiritual man with complex relationships. But the prosecution dismantled that image, piece by piece. They played the tape of the sermon, the chilling confession about bones in the water. They played the voicemails, Nia's terrified voice. They played the crawlspace recordings, raw, disturbing. And then the wives took the stand. Felicia went first. Steady, composed. She laid bare 16 years of lies, loneliness, and gaslighting. She told the court about the burner phone, the forged licenses, the night she discovered Tasha. Tasha followed, shaking but resolute. She brought photos, receipts, timelines. She wept when describing the moment she realized she'd married a ghost. Then came Sherelle. Her voice cracked. She described treating Nia at her clinic. The bruises, the whispered pleas, the fear in her eyes. She said she should have done more. She said she was leaving him, Sherelle told the court. I never saw her again. Each testimony shattered the illusion of the good pastor. The courtroom no longer saw Elijah as a man of God, but as something else. A manipulator, a predator, a man who used faith as a weapon and women as tools for control. Then came the prosecution's final blow. A journal, recovered from Elijah's private safe. Inside, his handwriting. Passages detailing discipline strategies for unruly partners. Verses misused to justify isolation, silence, even physical restraint. One page read, "Confession doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it's in obedience. Baptism is more than water, it's death of the old self." On the final page, just 2 lines. She threatened everything. I told her to be still. The jury took just 5 hours. Guilty. Of murder. Of fraud. Of coercion. Of burying a woman beneath holy waters and calling it redemption. But even in the wake of the verdict, a ripple of unease spread through the community. Because one juror, Juror 11, stood apart. They believed Elijah didn't act alone. There's more to this, they said during a press interview. He was always calm. Like he had help. Like someone else kept the wheels turning when he wasn't around. And that's when authorities reopened the church ledger and found Deacon Wallace's signature on 3 key renovation permits. Elijah Moore was behind bars, but justice, as always, was not so simple. In Hollow Creek, the guilty verdict sparked celebration for some, confusion for others, and quiet dread in the hearts of those who knew the story wasn't finished. Because beneath the headlines and the conviction, questions still simmered. Unanswered. Unsettling. Why was the church ledger signed by Deacon Wallace? Why had he approved the baptistry expansion without ever disclosing it to the board? And more importantly, why had he been seen in the church office the night before the police searched Elijah's home? Authorities brought Wallace in for questioning. He was a man of the cloth, older, soft-spoken, respected in the community for decades. He'd served under 3 pastors and had been with greater promise since the early days. He claimed ignorance, said he trusted Elijah, that he signed whatever forms were put in front of him. He was the leader, Wallace said. I just helped where I could. But when they examined his phone records, something cracked. There were dozens of late-night calls to Elijah, between midnight and 3 a.m., in the weeks leading up to the discovery of Joylene's remains. There were deleted texts, partial backups recovered only with forensic tools. And in those texts were instructions. Clean the crawlspace. Burn the letters. Tape the new entry, don't label it. Deacon Wallace had not just known. He had participated. A second arrest sent shockwaves through Hollow Creek. A second betrayal. From another man the town trusted. But Wallace wasn't a killer, at least not directly. His charges, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, conspiracy to commit fraud. When pressed in court, he broke. Tears streamed down his face as he admitted the truth. I thought I was protecting the ministry. He told me it was spiritual warfare. That these women were seduced by the devil. That we were their only hope. He paused. I believed him. God forgive me. I believed him. But even then, it wasn't over. One last journal entry surfaced. Smuggled out of Elijah's prison cell by another inmate and delivered to an online tabloid before authorities intercepted it. It read, "They found Joylene. They still haven't found the lake." Nia's voice echoes louder than her body ever could. Law enforcement interpreted it as a riddle. But the women, the survivors, they read it differently. They believed it meant Nia was still out there. Somewhere. Maybe dead. Maybe alive. But no one had found her body. No confirmed death. No closure. Felicia revisited the voicemail. Every word. Every pause. And she noticed something. Nia said, "Don't let him baptize anyone else. Not kill. Not hurt. Baptize." What if Nia hadn't just disappeared? What if Elijah baptized her, and she survived? And what if she's still running? Still watching? Still waiting for someone to tell the whole story? Now Hollow Creek prays in silence. The sanctuary sits empty, doors chained, windows dark. The cross above Greater Promise Baptist is weather-worn, its gold dulled by summer storms and scandal. No choir sings here now. No baptisms. Just the faint echo of what was once a holy place, now a monument to secrets. The pews are covered in plastic sheets, dust thick in the corners. The baptismal tank, once a symbol of salvation, has been drained, sealed, and marked with crime scene paint that still stains the steps. Some residents won't even walk past it. Others still cross themselves when they do. For a town built on faith, healing doesn't come easy. Some families left. Couldn't bear the whispers, the reminders. Others stayed, trying to reclaim what Elijah had corrupted. A new pastor was offered the pulpit, but declined. Too much blood in the water, he said. Sherelle, Tasha, and Felicia never returned to the church. They moved quietly, separately, bound not by proximity but by survival. They talk sometimes. Text. Share updates. Sherelle is back in nursing part-time. Tasha started therapy. Felicia speaks at domestic violence seminars under a different name. But none of them sleep the same. The past doesn't vanish. It lingers. In half-finished sermons. In unanswered voicemails. In a black binder marked sanctuary, still locked away in evidence. And Nia? There's still no trace. Some think she's dead, buried deeper than anyone's dared to dig. Others believe she escaped, that she faked her end, vanished into the anonymity of survival. Every few months, a tip comes in. A woman matching her description seen in a bus station. A cashier swears she recognized her eyes. A voicemail left with no callback number, saying simply, "Tell them I got out. Tell them I'm not coming back." But nothing ever sticks. The lake Elijah wrote about was searched. Drones. Divers. Dogs. Nothing. The truth is, the town doesn't know what to believe anymore. About Elijah. About Nia. About themselves. Because in the end, justice wasn't clean. Yes, he was convicted. Yes, he's behind bars. But the scars remain, on the women, on the faith community, on every person who once believed that God's house was safe. Now, when the wind blows across Hollow Creek, it sounds different. Like whispers caught in rafters. Like hymns sung backward. Like names still waiting to be spoken aloud. Joylene. Nia. April. Maya. Some gone. Some maybe still watching. And when the sun sets behind the church, casting long shadows over the pulpit, the town remembers the cost of silence. The weight of unchecked power. The danger of faith in the wrong hands. Every story has two sides, but the truth waits in the shadows. Join us as we uncover the hidden truths, the unspoken betrayals, and the moments that define survival. Subscribe now to follow every twist and turn, because in the world of true crime, justice is just the beginning.